Hello, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Increase Savings and Other Benefits in Offshore Outsourcing by 25 to 30%. My name is David Goodstein, and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It is our pleasure to be co-host of today's event. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to quickly tell you a few tools throughout today's session you can use at any time. We encourage you at any time to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, submit your questions in the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the Submit button. Today's webinar will be recorded, and you will be receiving a follow-up email in approximately 2 days with a link to the recorded webinar and the presentation slides, as well as the contact information for the speaker. The presentation slides will also be available at outsourcing.com if you choose to go there. So I would first like to say a few words about the Outsourcing Institute for those who aren't familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcing buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals that experience at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. So before we continue, I'd like to say a few words about the upcoming event we have for the Outsourcing Institute. We have the Wall Street Tech Conference show, which will be on March 13th. We'll be covering what is known as T5, which includes sourcing, cloud computing, big data, mobility, and security and compliance. To find more details, please visit us at outsourcing.com. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker is Saf. We've done a lot of webinars with Saf in the past, and he's the greatest at this. And I'd like to now turn it over to Saf.
David, thank you. At this point in time, I want to introduce a couple of poll questions in here. I would like to know our audience that are attending today. So the first question is really just to understand, are you currently offshoring? Because that will help us drive the rest of my presentation. So the poll is up. If you'll take just a few seconds to click on yes or no, and then we will announce the results and go to the next poll. Oh, a large majority of 92% of you are actually offshoring. That is great. The material that I'm going to cover will definitely be of interest to you guys to figure out how best you can improve, get more value from your offshoring. And those people who aren't outsourcing today, which are really 8%, the information would be useful to you in terms of how you could set things up and what to watch out for, what are you to consider and go into offshoring one of these days. Let's go to the next poll, please. Okay, this has to do with, since you are outsourcing, majority of you, I want to get some sense for your experience. Rating from 1 through 5, 5 being the best, you're getting everything that you really wanted out of offshore outsourcing, to number 1, the worst. It really means to me you are conveying that, gosh, I don't know why I went there, this is a can of worms. I wish I can find a way out of this. So that is the worst. And the in between, some gradations, you pick whichever you feel like. There is no absolutes here. I'm trying to get some sense about the satisfaction with your offshore outsourcing. Let's take a few seconds here. Interesting. About 70% of you say you're somewhere in between, and about 30% saying that it's doing well. Okay, that's really good information. For the people who are in both those brackets, the number 3 and number 4, again, the emphasis of this webinar is not that you aren't getting value, but how can you increase value from your offshore outsourcing and the benefits from by as much as 20 to 30%. I have a case study to present. I'm going to get started. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, let's jump right into it. And this is a company on the East Coast, about $150 million in sales, and their problem was their bottom line was about $4 million a year, roughly, after all the expenses, R&D, everything was taken care of, and they'd gone offshore about 6 years ago with the whole intent of saving money. That was their primary reason. And over the years, they had had mixed results with their offshore outsourcing. And when I took a look at their operation, both onshore and offshore, here is what jumped out at me. The first thing was, over a period of time, the organization had changed significantly, but there was no central coordination of the organization, either here or offshore. The second thing that jumped out at me was the fact that they were using what I call the team extension model versus discrete deliverables. Let me explain to you how the offshoring had been set up in this particular case. Not that everybody would do it this way, but this is how it was set up here. They would have a team of total size about 15 people in product development, and 4 or 5 of the senior people would be here onshore in the US. Other 10 people were offshore. So the manager in charge of the team was constantly coordinating on a daily basis what happened between here and there, daily phone calls back and forth, daily emails back and forth. And that was really exasperating for the manager. And I very quickly pointed out that, hey, this is really a no-win model. I've seen this time and time again in the last 20 years. This really does not work. You need to be able to create discrete deliverables so that at least they can go a week of doing work on their own, meaning the offshore team. There can be interaction, not that it doesn't have to be, but at least you assign them specific things to deliver. So they redid their entire delivery model based upon discrete deliverables. That improved things quite a bit. The second thing I found was, over a period of time, the vendor, offshore vendor, who is one of the top tier companies out of India, they had placed a number of people, to be specific, about 6 coordinators on site. So the goal was, okay, the managers here would go tell their coordinator, this is what all we really need to do, and they are coordinated at the detail level with their offshore teams, and the cycle kind of went on. And over time, what had happened was there was a span of control issue nobody had paid attention to, simply because it's a company, everybody has got other things to do. And what had happened initially, one coordinator was coordinating about 25 to 30 people offshore, but due to a range of reasons, the offshore team had shrunk, but the number of coordinators still remained at 6. And when I went and looked at it, I found that one coordinator was more than adequate to coordinate all of the work that was being done by the offshore teams. I'm not saying teams. So what happened here was we not only went from team extension to discrete deliverables model, and we collapsed the number of offshore coordinators. Just those two moves alone saved this company about $500,000. Recognize that on-site personnel staff cost, even though they're from a vendor, they're pretty close to equal to what you would pay a regular employee. So if you look at the bigger picture, this company was realizing about a $4 million P&L run rate annualized, and they were able to realize roughly $500,000 by this one thing alone, and that gave them a significant boost. $500,000 may or may not sound like a lot, but for a company that's making $4 million, $500,000 in savings was quite big from their point of view. And then we did a number of other things. I'm giving you a quick highlight here, but they were able to improve the bottom line quite a bit based upon this. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is another case study I want to talk to you about. Again, software company. These guys were in customized solutions business. They had a product, and each time they would go when they provide a solution to a customer, very heavy customization required. So what that did mean? That really meant that they had to rapidly ramp up their staffing locally here. And somebody 5-6 years ago had the bright idea, well, let's go offshore and maybe it's going to be cheaper for us to go do this offshore ramp up and ramp down. Sure enough, but they were using the traditional approach. What do I mean by the traditional approach? This is, you have say 20 people with a certain level of experience, 4 to 5 years or 6 years or whatever. You found people with a similar experience offshore, and it is simply what I call wage arbitrage. You move the jobs offshore, and people's functions remained exactly the same, and you simply did it hopefully at a cheaper cost. That was okay, except that what was happening in this particular case, this was a very complex product, which meant that each time they needed to recruit people, because of the fluctuating demands, they needed to invest in training. The training meant that probably at least 2 months worth of solid training, and which point in time they weren't really being productive. So not only was it costing people time from the vendor side, but it was also costing training time for my client. So we looked at that model, and together we came up with a very different approach. And here's an interesting one that most people have not seen implement this. We restructured the way that they were offshoring. What did that mean? It really means when we studied the deeper dive into the projects, we found that the offshore, we didn't have to have 20, 30, 40, or 50 people with all the same level of experience. We only needed about 10 people offshore with deep experience, but the rest of the functions were really report writing. We restructured the team so that we always kept 10 people constant, and we trained them once. So training time was minimized. But what also happened was these report writers, we could recruit them quickly, train them in a couple of days, and when the customization jobs went away at my client site, we then did not retain those same people offshore. They didn't need to be there. So this gave them the ability to have a really flexible staffing model and at the same time keep their costs under control. So what it did was, this was really not only flexibility, this was a growth strategy for the company using global resources as one of the strategies for their use. Okay, so that's case study number 2. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, these are a couple of examples, but the other things that I really find when we talk about improving performance offshore, okay, um, there are a range of things that I find over time people encounter, my clients encounter. These are hidden costs. Why are they hidden costs? Because they were costs they did not plan on encountering when they first wrote the contract to your vendor. Okay, if you understand what they are, and many of them I'm sure that you guys have run into it, and then find ways to deal with it, you can improve the overall performance. There are a range of these hidden costs, and today I'm going to hit on some of the most common themes that I find. Okay, the first one is turnover. Let's take a look at a poll question. David, if you are ready, can we throw a poll? Well, okay, maybe not yet. Okay. This is a comment that I find, though. You can read it, but basically, I hear this quite often. Just as soon as I train somebody, they leave or the vendor assigns them to some other client, I got to retrain the person. This is a hidden cost for you who are outsourcing, because you don't plan on, okay, the people are going to leave, I got to reinvest in training. Majority of the models presented by vendors is, boss, you train them for me once, I take care of it from now on. And that may be so in some cases, but most of the time I find you have to get involved in retraining people. Okay, let's take a poll and see what kind of turnover you folks are experiencing. Okay, so this is what's your turnover rate? I want to get some sense for it's a reality check in terms of what you guys are finding. Is it less than 5% offshore turnover, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, or above 15? It's simply I just want to get some sense and the reality check, because I hear turnover to be a major problem with every client that I talk to, but again, I want to understand your points of view. So take a few seconds, please. Wow, 5 to 10%, 40%. So it is about 10% for better than half of you. That is 60%. That's a little higher number than what I was expecting, but I'm not totally surprised. So okay, so let's go take a look at what approaches you can use to deal with turnover. The first thing I would say to you, many of the clients, when I first talk to them, their first reaction is, Sat, why am I worried about turnover? It is the vendor's problem. That's why I hired them in the first place. They are their people. They got to go handle this turnover issue. It is the vendor's problem ultimately, but I have a slightly different viewpoint. You have to proactively manage and work with the vendor. You have a role to play, and that may not be directly talking to the people on an ongoing basis. However, here are the things that you can do. First thing is, when I don't know let's talk about the metrics here. When somebody tells me turnover, when the vendors talk to me, they say, Sat, my turnover rate is the best in the industry. I'm less than 10%. Okay, majority of the time when I dive deeper, what they're trying to tell me is it is a company-wide turnover rate. If they got 1,000 people, they lost 10% over the year. So that's what they're talking about. However, you know, there are what most people, what the vendors don't tell you is, um, what is the turnover rate for you? For example, one of you, you know, 90% of you have got offshore centers there, and some kind of an offshoring relationship. Let's say you got 200 people offshore. Out of the 200 people, how many have actually left in the last year? Is it really 10%? Is it 20%, 30%? And you got to take a look at not only your whole organization to organization level, but let's say you have a critical project that you are working on. You got 20 people offshore and 6 people left over the year, which I've seen happen quite often. So to you, it is no longer 10%, it is 30% attrition. And you are faced with all the problems that attrition brings in, meeting deadlines, training people, being in the hot seat, all of those things. Okay, so the first thing that I tell my clients is, look, understand turnover, understand the metrics. These are some of the different things. Now, the other thing that happens is planned rotations. This seldom gets mentioned, but it happens over time, and that's why it's a hidden cost to you, because no vendor comes and tells to you and say, hey boss, I'm going to plan to rotate my people every 6 months or every 12 months from project to project. Why do I do it? Because people are going to leave me anyhow. I might as well have them in my company by assigning them to a different client, different part of my organization, because my people want to learn. They want to rather, you know, they would rather be with me rather than go someplace else. Okay, that may be so. However, you need to be clear on what planned rotations are, what is the policy of your vendor. This is an actionable item for you. If you guys haven't done it, sit down with your vendor and have a discussion that says, hey, what is the planned rotation? How much do you do? And you got to dive deeper and then get an understanding of what they are, and then figure out what metrics that you're going to use for planned rotations. I would go next step and say, make it part of your contract. Use an addendum if you have to, and say, look, planned rotations will be X. This is how it will be measured. Okay, that will be part of the metrics. Incentives. You know, you can provide a lot of incentives to the staff, and it works pretty much the same way as it would work here in the U.S. These are the golden handcuffs. These are more like retention bonuses, if you will, and we have tried that in several clients. Retention bonuses for a certain period of time, certain duration until a critical project is completed. You can make it meaningful to the individual people or team level or at your center level. These are all things that we have implemented in varying permutations and combinations, and that's an idea that you can go forward with. You need to work it out with your vendor partner offshore. One note of caution, work also with your legal department to make sure by doing these kinds of things, they don't be, for IRS purposes, they do not get construed as quote unquote your employees, if you will. Okay, so that's something that you can put in place. The other things, we've done some surveys and looked at a lot of industry surveys. Why do people leave various companies, various employers, or even your own? Because people are always wanting to learn more. That's the big thing among various youngsters. I'm talking about people with 2 to 5 year experience. They want to learn more. They want to build their resume. They want to do more interesting work. So that comes out as even much more than the amount of money that they get paid. Money get paid is number 2 or number 3. Interesting work and career progression is probably number 1 or 2 on many of the surveys that I've seen. So to the extent that in your own centers you are able to create an environment wherein people can feel like you have enough critical mass, you're doing enough interesting things in the center, maybe they join you at one point, but then you can help them progress, learn more, give them kind of a career path. Again, these are all things that you need to work it out with your vendor and your partner. You can't do it alone, but that's just a thought. That may not be applicable to everybody, but to the extent that you can, those are things that you can implement. Then the last bullet I have here is about cross-training. That's straightforward, but overstaffing may or may not be. These are some vendors are willing to provide some level of additional staffing. Let's say it's a 10% project, maybe they put 1% additional to cover for turnover kinds of issues. However, they would not expect to bill you, but in return they should get to choose whoever they want to put on that staff. So these are some ideas. Again, you need to take a look at what would work in your particular case. Okay. The next thing that I see in hidden costs is productivity, especially low offshore productivity. Let's take a quick poll, see what you guys feel about the productivity offshore. I'm simply looking for an estimate. Okay, so do you guys feel that the people offshore are as productive as your staff in-house? Some people argue, some vendors argue that they are better. Are they same? And there are a couple of other slots that I thought about, maybe half to 75%, or maybe 50% or less. Well, let's take a minute, maybe a few seconds rather, and then let you guys vote. Wonderful. There are some people who find that it is better, same about 9%. Again, about 2/3 of you are finding it is 50% or less. You know, this is interesting. Let's go to the next slide and I will tell you why I think it's interesting. This is a quote I find from many of the clients and other colleagues that I see. They're simply saying, my staff in the U.S. can do the work of 2 people offshore. And implied in that question is, why in God's name are you going offshore to start with? Because if it takes 2 people and I got all this other overhead to manage, show me the money is sort of the question that many people ask. And you know, even in this poll, we are finding that many of you, if not all, the majority of you are in that same boat. Let's go see. You know, that's what's happening in the industry. That's the reasons why. But let me give you some approaches on how to address that. Okay, this is not a comprehensive everything there is to do, but these are some common ones that I find. Okay. Hire the right offshore staff. It really seems pretty obvious, but however, most people think that, hey, that's the vendor's problem. I'm going to give him my contract. I'm going to give him my specs. Let them go do it. You know, it's what I'm finding is, or what I have found in the last 20 years of working in this field is that people who are much more proactive, more involved, they have less problems. They can get more value out of it. So one of the key messages to you is you got to get involved. Okay, how do you get involved in the right offshore staff? You know, if you're starting off in a relationship with a brand new vendor, I would say you need to not only tell them what kinds of people that you want, you need to get very, very intimately involved. You may want to review resumes, you may want to phone screen people, and I've seen cases wherein the hiring the manager under whom they are going to work flies off to the offshore destination, spends 2 or 3 or 4 days, and comes back with a chosen set of people. Again, this is when you're getting started. These steps may be necessary. And it may be necessary even at in an ongoing relationship. If there's a really critical project, you want to be very clear on what kind of skills that you are getting. You need to start off with the right staff. Over time, the partners and vendors will get better at doing that, but they may not be there to get started with. Okay. And the second thing that I see is the right projects. Okay, right projects. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one more thing though. In the right offshore staff, there is one more key ingredient that I find. Not only the individual people, what I find in the industry is the mid-level management. I'm talking about project managers and maybe one level above. The experience level, since it's been a high-growth industry offshore, is really mixed. So you need to make sure that your project manager, who is going to be ultimately responsible offshore to implement the stuff that you're giving them, is really conversant not only with the technical aspects, but the management aspects as well. I find that a very mixed set of skills, meaning some are really awfully inadequate, some are okay, some are good, but I'm finding that it is better than half of them require some level of help in that area. So take a look at your staff offshore, not only the individual contributors, but much more the project managers, technical leads. They can make or break you in terms of how successful this whole thing works out for you. Okay, so right projects and right structure. I think that the right structure really alluded to that one. Right projects. You know, people send off projects quite often. Again, not always. Initially, at least, hey, I don't want to do this. It is work that nobody here wants to do. I'm simply going to offshore it. That may be okay initially to test the waters, but it doesn't work over the long haul. Because people are people. You want to get them motivated. If you are doing maintenance only, make sure that you got the staffing there and expect some level of attrition. Because there are lots of opportunities offshore as well. There are other issues that come up because of that, but you need to make sure that's one. The second thing is, supposing you are doing GUI projects offshore, you know, that requires a whole lot of user interface skills and implied understanding of what the context is and what the cultural things are, and no amount of studying is going to get that. You got to have lived it. You got to know what that is. You got to be a part of the culture. So be careful in how you select projects, and select more projects that are much more discrete. And again, this depends upon the longevity of the relationship, and do people there understand the context? Can we help them understand the context, which is one of my bullets here, and then to provide them meaningful incentives, and I talked about those. Okay, so let's see here. What next? Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to have you guys read these quotes, and I'll shut up for a moment, but these are some things that I hear from my colleagues in the industry a lot. Okay, hopefully you guys had enough time to glance through these quotes. And the last one really kind of gets me. You know, basically many of them come to me and say, Sat, you know, I'm doing everything I can. I'm working very hard. I simply can't rely upon what the heck these guys are telling me. Why can't they just simply say they can do it? Okay. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll give you some approaches on how to deal with it. You know, it isn't that people offshore, regardless of which particular country you're talking about, and this particular problem is more prevalent in what I call high context cultures. India, China, and some of those countries come to mind. It isn't that they're really lying to you. It's part of the culture. They really don't want to say no to their boss. They are used to saying yes, boss. And I can tell you stories after stories after stories, how many times I've sat people down and said, okay, really, you really believe you can do that? I said, absolutely. They say, absolutely, yes. Yes, no problem. I'll do it. But then what happens 2 days before the deadline, and say they have already burnt the midnight oil, and then maybe the day before integration happens, they can throw up their hands and say, I've tried everything, I can't do it now. And it puts, it's put me in a bind many times. And here's the way to deal with it. Look, understand that cultures are different someplace else. Over time, this may not be a problem. Everybody understands everybody, and people offshore will be willing to tell you, hey, I can't do this because whatever. But at least initially, what you get is what I consider a happy talk, meaning that they want to make you happy by talking, saying yes. Then you go away saying, okay, he's a good vendor, he's going to do this, until you really find out time and time again they really meant to say no, but they just couldn't. You need to understand the culture, you need to understand what they say and what they mean, and over time, again, these problems will reduce or go away. There are a lot of resources available to do this. There are cross-cultural training. Many people offer that. We even offer an online resource that people can spend 2 or 3 hours and really get up to speed and face very heavy dividends. But there are quite a few resources available to understand cross-cultural issues and communicating how to work with people. Okay, and the next thing is you are dealing with people 10,000 miles away sometimes, right? Or 8,000 miles away, whatever the case may be, remote places from where you are. So you can't have water cooler conversation. And you got to make sure that your processes are really crystal clear. What do I mean by that? You have a very clear idea about how often you get status reports, how well those status reports are written. I even use a very simple technique when I have a telecom with people. At the end of the day, I used to make up a list of action items and send it to them, but I've gotten much wiser now, and I tell them, hey, look guys, we have had this call for 1 hour. I want you to send me a summary and action items of what you need to do and what I'm supposed to do. You'd be really surprised how often it comes back with maybe a third of the items I thought should be there were missing. So that's a good simple technique to get them into, and that is just a very simple thing that you can do. But from there, you need to manage escalation processes, and how do they get supported? How do you support them? What are the escalation processes? Offshore, onshore, these are all part of managing offshore. Okay, don't have the time to go into all of the details here, but the idea, you get some ideas here as to what you need to do to get there. Okay. Vendor capabilities, quite often, I just had a recent client here. They have been offshoring for 2 or 3 years, and suddenly they are finding lots of problems with that particular vendor. They weren't having any. Several things happen. A vendor that may have been good for you 2 years ago may or may not be good for you today, because either they have outgrown you or you have outgrown them. Things change in the industry. So you need to be constantly vigilant about capabilities of the vendor. Do they continue to meet your business needs today? And conversely, this is something most people don't think about. Do you meet their business needs? Okay, these guys, many companies offshore that I used to know 20 years ago, they are 2 or 3,000 people, and the companies that I work for were really major clients of them. And they now have 100,000 people. The same company, unless we also had grown so much, which we did, may not be as important to them. So you don't get the same attention. So that same vendor may or may not be as good for you today. So again, take a look at those things. Okay. I have a case study to go into. Next slide here. And before I do that, I want to get your perceptions on a couple of issues. Poll. Okay. This is about your offshoring model. Are you using a time-based per hour, per month, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, you are hiring n number of people and they are paid by head count? Or are you using time-based plus they have to deliver some results? Maybe that's sort of a hybrid model. But there are some companies that I am seeing they are really going to results-based only. And there may be other models. I don't know what they are, but I just threw that in there to give you flexibility to say other. Take a few seconds here and click on which of these apply to your case. Okay, interesting. Time-based plus tied to results. That's very good. Better than half of you are not only time-based but going for results. Okay, that's excellent. Okay, so I'm going to the next case study actually reinforces that time-based plus tied to results. In fact, in this particular case, let's just go ahead and go to the next slide, David. This is a case study. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you able to go to the second questionnaire before I launch into this? Is there oh, yeah, okay. All right. So this is the other question I want to get your feedback on. Do you believe that your goals and your vendors' goals are aligned? This may sound like a strange question, but the next case study will tell you more about it. Do you believe that your business goals and your vendor's business goals are the same? For example, your business goals may be, hey, I want to cut costs off I want to cut my overall costs by going offshore. I want to use as less number of people at the least cost. So that may be your goal. But how many do you believe that you two, both of you are aligned? So let's take a moment. Wow, a third of you believe that they're not aligned, and that really means something close to, okay, in fact, exactly 75% is a combination of don't know and know. Wonderful. Okay, that leads me to the next case study. Let's take a look at this. This is all about aligning goals, paying for results. Okay, and I'm going to relate to you a case study that this is actually a pretty large company, and this is a tax support application. And what they did was in year number 1, what they did was to go offshore and hire something like 100 agents. And they went the typical model, time-based, and we are paying for number of people that we have hired, and they put in all the usual things for efficiencies, right? And what they found when year number 2 came around, their business had grown quite a bit, and they needed to actually double the support, provide double the level of support. They went offshore, and then the first reaction they got from their client was, from their vendor was, okay, you want to double the support level? Oh, no problem. We're 100 people. You give me 200 people, we will do that. And my client said, you know, we really don't want to do that. You already gone through learning, etc., etc. So that didn't go very well. So then they started to put together the paying for results model. Okay, so the thing that they came up with was, look, instead of worrying about how many bugs, how many support calls somebody took, etc., what we are going to do is to align. I'm the VP of support. I'm going to align the same metrics that I get from my boss. I'm going to measure you the same way. That is basically, look, not only CSAT, but how much improvement do you make in the overall productivity of people offshore? How much more business that you are going to get me, how much conversions from support calls to support contracts, okay? And per person, when they talk about productivity improvement, you know, last year one person was able to handle and support n number of calls. It is not just the calls. And how much are you going to convert them into satisfied customers, satisfied clients, and you handle this. So they came up with a series of what I call outcomes-based metrics-driven approach. Initially, the vendor was really very resistant to the approach. But they worked it out, and they put the the metrics-based approach in place. And at the end of year 2, what I'm happy to report here is both the vendor and my client were really happy that the vendor actually made more money in that in that second year based upon the metrics. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And my client was also happy because they were able to do more with less. Okay, so this is. You need to consider outcome-based and similar kinds of results-based, metrics-based approach. What you get out of that is, you know, again, without going into all the details here in this particular webinar today, they were able to incent innovative behavior offshore. Okay, that can be a topic in its own right for a whole webinar. We are thinking about it for one of the future topics. Now, there's a potential for higher benefits, and the big thing was both the vendor and my client were working on towards the same goal. That is the goal of reducing costs, improving customer satisfaction, all of those, because simply transferred those same metrics to them, and they were working together as a team. Okay. So challenges, there is vendor resistance, and developing the right metrics is not easy depending upon what part of the organization you are at, and the roles, responsibilities, all of that need to be thought through. It is not easy, but it is not really hugely complex. We've been able to do this, 2 to 3 weeks, let's say 2 to 3 weeks. Put together and take a look at this, talk to the vendor and all of that, but those things need to be thought through. But at the end of the day, this thing creates more innovative behavior. What does that mean in terms of the overall goal of this webinar? Improve your benefits by 20 to 30%. In this particular case, case study, they went far beyond 20 to 30% in terms of benefits improvement just by using this approach, outcome-based metrics. Okay, Let's go to the next slide. Um, let's kind of pull this thing together. I've been talking about different case studies and various ways to identify hidden costs and eliminating them. But if you look at the big picture, how do you go about improving benefits from offshore outsourcing? Okay, I've got really pulling this thing together are really three major areas, right? One is eliminating hidden costs. I talked about it. That's the financial aspects. Benefits reality check. Okay, I often ask my new clients to say, okay, tell me how much benefits you are getting today, both quantitative, qualitative, and I find quite often that, Sat, I think I'm getting benefit because the costs are cheaper. My next question is by how much? Is it 20%, 30%, 50% compared to what you could do here? But if they have been doing this for a while, they have a reasonable feel, but no quantitative measurements. Whether you hire somebody else to do it for you or do it internally or somebody in the finance department could do it, but take a reality check at least once a year as to what the heck is happening. Then you need to take a look at your contracts. I talked about some metrics that you need to have there. That's on sort of the finance and business side of it. In the operation side of it, I talked about improving offshore management processes and how do you operate in multicultural environment. This is about training people, making sure that you know how to work with offshore staff. And on the same token, I find even in 2012, 13 rather, I'm still a year back, many vendors offshore don't quite know how best to work with US or other Western customers. That is changing a lot in big corporations, but it is again spotty. You need to make sure that the staff that you're dealing with is very well versed and they know your priorities. They know what you mean by ASAP. You really mean what the heck that means. Okay, those are kinds of things, and we're operating in multicultural environment. You may need to train some or all of your own managers, and that may be true of your vendors as well. From a strategic point of view, I talked about outcome-based. There's a whole lot more at the detail level to it, but conceptually I covered what outcome-based could mean to you. There are other strategies. There is rural offshoring. This is both rural offshoring in the U.S. There are a lot of cities around the U.S. with much less cost structure compared to major metropolitan areas, and there are a number of companies that have sprung up. You may not have to absolutely go offshore, and this is especially true of support, if you will. There are pros and cons and all of that, but you may want to think about that. At the second level, rural offshoring is happening even offshore. Sorry, I meant to say rural outsourcing here as opposed to rural offshoring in the strategy. Rural offshoring is also happening. People are moving from major cities to the second and third tier cities in places like India, where some of the problems that you see, the attrition and even high costs, are not there, but that is not for everyone, not for every project. You may want to consider hybrid approaches in those kinds of situations. If one of you are interested in that, send me an email. I'll be happy to respond with specifics of what that could mean. Insourcing. Frankly, maybe you thought of offshoring as a good way to address some needs a few years ago, but I submit to you, you really need to take a look at your project stack at least annually and figure out, do you still want to leave it offshore? Maybe you want to bring it in-house. So how do you do all this? The conduct an assessment. I advise my clients to maybe start doing one assessment first, and then the repeat assessments maybe at least once a year, but that doesn't, the second part doesn't take as much time as the first one. And these things can be done, we have done that for clients between about roughly 3 to 4 calendar weeks for most sized companies. And out of that comes an assessment, out of an assessment comes a series of opportunities / tasks. You need to prioritize them, what it is that means to you. Then you need to develop a roadmap as to how we can go about implementing it, and then go to implementation. Quite often, the big thing I want to point out to you here is majority of these approaches, ideas, they don't necessarily consume additional capital. They'll consume bandwidth, they may consume people's time, they may need to be reorganizations in ways that you do it, but those are all hugely not capital intensive per se. Okay, so this is kind of a big picture, how you go about improving benefits from your offshore outsourcing. Okay, David, let's go to the next slide. I think we are, okay, we are into Q&A.
Yeah. So at this time, we're going to open up to some Q&A that you submitted during the presentation here.
David, any questions? I'm going to...
Yeah, we got a few questions here.
Let's go into Q&A and see if you have any.
Sure, real quick here. First, we have, can offshore outsourcing be a
David,
business
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear you.
Hi, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, now I can hear. I think the problem was at my end. I'm sorry.
All right, great. Let's go. So can offshore outsourcing be a business transformation tool? And can you expand on that?
Oh, it's a terrific question. Really terrific question. My answer on that is absolutely yes. It can be one of the business transformation tools. I've seen companies, in fact, I know one particular company that comes to my mind straight off. This is a company that's about $150, $200 million in sales, and they were getting to the point where they wanted to expand further, but again, the usual problems of how do you find more money, how do you do this, how do you do, there are always more projects to do than money available to do it with. So what they were able to do is to develop a comprehensive outsourcing offshore strategy, and they were able to look at their overall business, identify areas where they could do product development, support, and IT services were the 3 areas that they decided to go offshore with. Mm-hmm. And they approached it as a company-wide strategy, actually. It wasn't something ad hoc. And they went really completely, whole hog, embraced that as a strategy. And what it did was they were able to do a whole lot. They were able to bring products to market that they couldn't do otherwise. That meant internal organic growth. At the end of about 3 years now, that company has about 40% of products coming from their offshore staff being actually developed offshore, supported offshore, and it's now, again, offshore gave them a leverage that didn't exist otherwise. I want to give you a quick another example that I found. This is a more recent one. Here is a company who is in the throes of looking at global resources to really expand into Asia Pacific markets. So what they're doing is they are setting up a center in India, to be specific, to be able to serve the local market. It's not simply for cost savings. It is tapping the local knowledge to be able to serve local market, and they are really in the throes of bringing our products from the ground up, of course using their core technologies to market to that part of the world. So they are staffing it up with all the marketing people, product development people, and they're also using the support centers there to provide support not to the US but to Asia Pacific and that part of the world. So these are all things that one can use. These are some quick examples that come to mind that talk about business transformation using global resources as a strategy.
Great, great. Okay, I think we have time for just one more question here. If you could really quickly, beyond cost, what have you seen as reasons for going offshore beyond cost?
You know, cost is an obvious one, but you know, I've seen some examples of people going there for getting skills. Fundamentally, quite a few times, people want to find the skill sets, and if you are in Silicon Valley, some highly specialized skills may or may not be available, but they may be offshore, depending upon what they are. And the ability to ramp up very quickly. Supposing you really want 50 people, you know, in a 1,000-person company offshore, wherein their whole business model is I've got people ready to go to work right away, compared to you having to hire, you know, find, recruit, bring on board 50 people. That may be a 3 to 4 month process at the very least, and that may or may not be easily accomplishable in your case. Those are a couple of quick things that come to my mind.
Great, great. Thanks a lot. So I guess at this time we'll end this session. We ran over actually a couple of minutes, but I just want to thank Seth for doing this presentation for us. He put a lot into it, and it was really informative. And just on behalf of the Outsourcing Institute, I want to thank Seth and thank all the people who dialed in to listen in. And again, this will be available on our website. You will be receiving an email with the link to the recorded webinar with contact information as well. So thanks, Seth.
Okay, thank you all.